Welcome, willkommen, vitami, benvenido. Inspeeritalk podcast. I'm Ian Tidder. I'm a partner at DevelopX, and I'm talking to entrepreneurs and founders and senior managers about their experience with creating new software products and software companies. And today I'm with Nick Denning. Nick Denning, an old friend of mine, going back many years, and a founder at Diegesis and a number of other companies, which I hope we'll hear about today. How are you doing, Nick?
Ian, thank you very much indeed. Yes, it is a fair while. I think it was early 1988 when I was working for Celltech, and Celltech were your customer at PT. So it goes back a while.
Generally speaking, companies tend to be either a professional services company or a software product company. But I think in your case, you've got a very interesting model that somehow combines the two. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it actually combines the three, because there is reselling somebody else's products, there's developing your own products, and there's providing professional services. And the challenge with that is that though each of the people wear the same colour suit, they are three fundamentally different businesses. Mm-hmm. So reselling third-party product, it's relatively low risk, it's relatively low return, and the factors are revenue and margin. Professional services, it's medium risk. You have to hire a whole load of people. You've got to go out and sell their services. But if you're vaguely successful, you've got people. You can see people are on the bench. You know you've got a problem in 2 months' time because you'll run out of cash. So you've either got to fire them if you've got a problem, or got to get out and do a bit more selling.
Yeah,
it's very visible if you've got a problem. So medium risk, medium return, and the key factors there are not revenue and margin, but they're utilization and fee rate, and optimizing those two.
Absolutely.
And then in a product business, it's again it's high risk, and it's revenue and cost. So, and it's high risk because you never know, particularly in most of our software businesses these days, in this country anyway, if you raise 20 million quid and your investors want a return on investment in 3 years, then you've got to get out. It's got to be out and sold, and you're almost always looking for the 100k a pop, £1 million a pop sort of sales, because that's the only way that you can go quickly enough to pay the salaries and then also pay the revenue or pay back your investors and get that forward trajectory going. So so then you're heading for big ticket, and the high risk part becomes I made a sale for £1 million 3 months ago, and I've not done a single transaction since. And when is the next £1 million deal coming down the pipe? And of course, a great line of business is if you've got something that's more you've got more recurring revenues, or you've got and that's why moving to subscription revenues is so good. It's such a good idea for product vendors, because you can predict your future cash flows far more effectively while you've still got something that is working while you're sleeping. But what we did was we were fundamentally a services business. That's what I started up. A colleague of mine who joined the business to help grow the services business was actually really worried that I was taking on humongous risk in what I was bidding for on the services side. Now, we always delivered. I think we only had one project that ever went vaguely wrong in that company, but he was quite concerned, and that led him into the concept of risk management. And through various contacts, we ran across people at the MOD in Abbey Wood in Bristol who were looking for a new risk management system. Their current system ran on Access. It was limited to about 5 people, and had modest functionality. So we hired a chap who was a risk manager at Abbey Wood. My colleague Richard drove the development and the requirements of the product. We spent £2 million of our own money before we had $1 of revenue back. And our first deal was for over £1 million, was to Lockheed Martin for the Joint Strike Fighter program. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, cool.
But
and you financed that from the services revenue.
Exactly. So
That was the synergy, I guess, right?
Yeah. Exactly. That's how they all fit together. But you've got to drive them as three completely separate businesses, because the product vendor, or the chap who's selling your products, wants to sell a product for £1 million a CPU and wants to give all your services away for free. And the chap who's selling a professional services business would love to use open source, because that reduces the obstruction, the cost of being taken out of his services business. And of course, both are wrong. Because if you focus your services business on open source, everybody can do that. So actually, the cunning plan is to be a lot more focused, find particular areas that are of product to specialize in, where there are relatively few people in the market because it's relatively expensive, and it's the right size of market for a company like ours. Whereas if we just specialize in .NET, well, every man and his dog is specializing in .NET, and we come across, whether it's competition from Accenture, who will compete with, and Logica or CGI as they now are, will compete with us in one way, or whether it's competition from India or the Philippines or Vietnam, who will compete with us on price in a different way. So it's trying to establish that niche that is a big enough market to have options for us to drive, but is not so big that everybody else wants to have a play.
As a founder and a leader in the company, how do you manage that tension between the three different divisions? One who want to sell services and don't really care about the license, and the other people that want to sell licenses and throw in the services. How do you must have a challenge managing that tension between the different business units? You
have to have a head of line of business for each of those three separate sections. You have to do that. It's the only way you can do it, because otherwise the person will have come from one of those worlds, and they will take all three businesses in the single direction. And sadly, that was what saw the demise of my first company after we floated. That we hired and appointed a CEO who was from a product resale company, and he didn't understand how our business was successful, and he looked at all the services people, as overheads rather than profit centers. Fired them all, fired them all, and then sadly there was not enough money to cover the overheads in the gaps between the £1 million sale. So there we go. Going back to the development of the business with services and product, you finally floated the business. You're a listed company. Yep. A load of people, founders of businesses, dream about that every day. And you achieved it. When that happened, how did that change your life? How did it change your life being a director of a listed company with shareholders and reporting duties and so on? In a sense, not at all. Richard and I, we weren't out there to make money. Sorry, let me rephrase that. It wasn't our primary objective to make money. Our primary objective was to make sure the world was using risk and being more effective at risk management. So I think we all saw money as a proof point of our success, and it's very nice to have it, but it was not the objective of itself. And so we carried on running the business pretty much as we had previously. The great thing was, because we'd raised money, we'd got ourselves out of the overdraft syndrome, whereas as a services business, we just always seemed to be in the overdraft of a couple of £100,000 scenario, and always then having to be really good about collecting invoices and collecting payments at the end of the month and all that sort of thing. And as soon as we got funding and had cash in the bank, that, strange enough, took away all the effort that we had to do on collecting cash. The cash then actually came in, not possibly 5 days later than it needed to, but it came in. But it meant we could focus our time and effort on the right things, which was selling. And so we grew the business so much more successfully, or so much more quickly, once we'd floated.
So you're saying that having the investors and therefore the cash behind you, that took away a big worry, and that more than outweighed the problems with the reporting and the information disclosure and so on that people talk about a lot.
Actually, we weren't worried. We knew we were profitable. And we were working for great customers. So it's not the worry per se. It was just making sure the money came in by the time we had to pay salaries. And the bank, and we were well supported by the bank at that time because they could see our cash flows, because we had all this. I mean, we had customers like Lloyd's, TSB, government organisations. We had a good breadth of customers, and they were good customers. So our banks knew what we were doing and supported us really well because we were a strong and profitable company. But it was great, once we floated, we brought in additional people to make sure that we could do all our reporting effectively. So that was a cost, but it meant we won more business as well. Because when we were selling in America, we started a subsidiary up in America. By being floated and having the oversight of being a listed business, it was a great help when very large customers were looking at were wondering, did they want to buy the products? Did they want their business to depend on this the products of a small company in Wimbledon? Well, by being listed, that gave us that credibility. So floating for us was exactly the right thing to do. Nothing to do with finance, to do with market credibility.
Do you see any downsides of it?
No, I don't think so. There were some challenges after we floated. We hired some great non-execs to help us to float. We probably should have changed them after we'd floated because they were able to guide us through flotation, but we didn't. They were not the right people to help us grow the business afterwards. And so, for example, David Mann, who was an ex-CEO of Logica, I think he was replaced by Martin Reed, but David Mann offered himself up to be a non-exec, and for some reason my colleagues didn't even bring him to the table, whereas he would have been a great guy for the sort of work we were doing, for example. So it's all about people. And if I look back on it, we had probably not been clinical enough about how we structured our team, but the seeds of that before we floated, but the seeds of that existed before we floated, and so it all comes back to people. It all comes back to effective HR of any business of any size. So that's probably the biggest lesson I got out of the whole of that process. But it was nothing to do with flotation. It was just to do with growing and bringing in the processes that any business that grows needs to put in place.
Yeah, all our businesses are people businesses, aren't they? Our greatest capital is our human capital. How do you find these days great human capital?
So we do a couple of things. So the first thing is we use a company called Give a Grad a Go,
right,
who specialise in recruiting new grads, really bright and able new grads, or finding really great new grads. And we like to hire people like that because they don't know how to fail. They've got good firsts or 2-1s. They've succeeded at most of the things they've done so far in their lives. Their minds are like sponges, and if we can find the people with the right ethos who are bright and able, then it's a great place to start. And we can then train them and direct them, and our business can grow as they grow. And we have an EMI option scheme. Everybody in the company, subject to getting to the next round of options, has options in the company, and therefore everybody can share in the value that they create. Now, it's not perfect. we always suffer, or it's inevitable that we will sometimes suffer. I've been working for you for 4 years. I don't know how to compare you with any other customer or any other employer. We're working in Wimbledon, so we've got the city up the road. The city always pays more than a software house can. So there is always a degree of loss of staff as they move on, but we have got a pretty good retention record. And all our people have come to us at the start of their IT career and grown with us. What we actually do is we make sure that all our young people, or the people we have hired from scratch and we develop their careers, we promote them. We make sure they are our leaders, but what we then do is to hire the old and bold, as it were, the people who've been in the English market for 30, 40 years, and we'll use them as like an RSM to make sure that our young leaders don't forget the POL and rations while they're focused on actually the mission. And that model works really well because it helps our young people not to avoid the horrendous mistakes while still leveraging their skill, enthusiasm, and intellect, and it has worked really well for us since we started Diegesis in 2008.
Great. So I think, Nick, I think we've run out of time, but there's been so many interesting insights and information about your career that's going to be useful to other people when they listen to this podcast. So thank you very much for talking to me today.
Ian, my pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
And I wish you all the best with as your business grows in the future.
And the same to you, sir, as your new business is developing rapidly. It's great to hear that too.
Thank you so much.